Don't leave me alone, Apache woman pleads for a new life with a cowboy. The wind moved softly across the dry land, lifting thin lines of dust into the evening air. The desert stretched wide and quiet, painted in soft gold by the falling sun. Far in the distance, low mountains stood like silent watchers. This was land that once belonged to the people of the Apache Nation, land filled with stories, songs, and memory. But now it felt empty, as if even the earth itself was tired. Iana walked alone across that land. Her steps were slow, not because she was weak in spirit, but because her body had reached its limit. She had been walking since sunrise. Her shoes were worn thin, and dust clung to the edges of her long skirt. Her dark hair, once carefully braided by her mother's hands, now fell loose over her shoulders. She did not look back. There was nothing left behind her worth returning to. Only months earlier, her life had been different. She had lived in a small settlement with her family. They did not have much, but they had each other. Her father had been a quiet man who believed that even in changing times, a person must hold on to dignity. Her mother had been gentle but strong, teaching Iana how to cook over open fire, how to gather herbs, and how to read the sky before a storm. But change came fast to their land. Outsiders arrived. Rules changed. Fear spread. Families were separated. Work became scarce. Hunger became common. Then sickness came. It moved through their settlement like a cold wind, touching almost every home. Iana watched helplessly as her mother grew weaker each day. Her father tried to stay strong, but even he could not fight what he could not see. Within weeks, she was alone. At first, neighbors helped her, but they had their own troubles. Food was short, work was uncertain. Some families decided to move west, others went north. Slowly, the small settlement became quieter and quieter until only a few remained. Iana tried to stay. She tried to gather wood to trade small handmade items in nearby towns to survive quietly, but whispers followed her. People looked at her with suspicion. She felt eyes on her wherever she went. One night, as she sat outside the small hut that had once been her home, she realized something painful. Staying there would not bring her family back. It would not bring safety. It would only keep her trapped in memory. So before sunrise the next morning, she packed what little she had, a blanket, a small pouch of dried food, and a necklace her mother had given her. Then she began to walk. She did not know exactly where she was going. She had heard that ranches farther south sometimes hired workers. Hard work did not frighten her. Loneliness did. For 3 days she traveled under the wide sky. During the day, the sun burned her skin. At night, the cold crept into her bones. She slept lightly, waking at every sound. Once she thought she heard coyotes howling not far away. Another time, she saw riders in the distance and quickly hid behind a rock formation until they passed. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. By the 4th day, her food was gone. Her lips were dry and cracked. She tried to stay strong, repeating her mother's words in her mind. When the body is tired, let the heart lead. But even the strongest heart needs rest. Late in the afternoon, she reached a narrow cattle trail. The ground was marked by hoofprints and wagon tracks. It was a sign that people passed through there. That gave her a small spark of hope. She followed the trail for as long as she could. The sun began to fall, turning the sky orange and pink. The beauty of it almost made her forget her pain. Almost. Her vision blurred. The world around her seemed to tilt. She tried to take another step, but her knees trembled. She reached for a nearby fence post, but her hand missed. The ground rose up quickly. Everything went dark. Not far from there, a man rode slowly along the same trail. His name was Daniel Carter. He was a cowboy who worked on a ranch not far from the border of Arizona. He had spent the entire day checking fences and guiding cattle toward water. His shoulders were broad from years of labor, and his face carried the quiet lines of someone who had seen both joy and sorrow. Daniel preferred silence. The desert suited him because it did not ask questions. As he guided his horse along the trail, he noticed something unusual ahead, a shape near the ground that did not belong there. At first, he thought it might be a fallen bundle of cloth. But as he moved closer, he saw a hand lying in the dust. He pulled gently on the reins, stopping his horse. For a moment, he simply stared. A young woman lay unconscious beside the trail. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. Dust covered her clothes, but even through the dirt he could see that she had once carried herself with pride. Daniel slid off his horse and knelt beside her. He was not a man who rushed into things. Life had taught him to be careful. Years ago, he had lost his wife during a brutal winter storm. Since then, he had kept his world small and controlled. He worked, he ate, he slept. He avoided trouble. This was trouble. He looked around. There was no one else in sight. No wagon, no horse, no camp nearby. Just open land. He reached down and gently touched her shoulder. She did not respond. He hesitated. Taking her with him could bring questions. The nearby town was not always kind to strangers, especially those from the old tribes. People talked, people judged. But leaving her there was not an option. Daniel removed his canteen and carefully poured a small amount of water against her lips. After a moment, she stirred slightly. Her eyelashes fluttered, but her eyes did not fully open. "She won't last the night out here," he muttered quietly to himself. He stood up and looked toward the fading sun. Darkness would come soon. With careful movements, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if hunger had already taken much from her. He placed her gently across his horse and secured her so she would not fall. Then he began the slow ride back to his cabin. The sky turned deep blue as the first stars appeared. The desert cooled quickly. Daniel rode in silence, his mind unsettled. He did not know her name. He did not know her story, but something about the way she lay there, small yet stubbornly alive, stirred something inside him that he had not felt in years. Responsibility. When he finally reached his small wooden cabin, he carried her inside and placed her carefully on his bed. He lit a lamp and examined her more closely. Her face, though tired, showed strength. Her hands were rough from work, not soft like someone unused to labor. This was not a careless traveler. This was someone who had fought to survive. He prepared a simple broth and waited for her to wake. Outside, the desert night settled quietly around the cabin. The wind brushed softly against the wooden walls. Inside, two lonely lives had just crossed paths, though neither fully understood it yet. Yana lay still, caught between exhaustion and awareness. Daniel sat in a nearby chair, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. He told himself this was temporary. He would help her recover, then she would go on her way. That was the simple plan. But deep inside, the desert had already begun to shift. And neither of them knew that this moment, this small decision on a quiet trail, would change the direction of both their lives forever. When Yana finally opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the ceiling above her. It was made of rough wooden planks, not the open sky she had grown used to during the past few days. For a moment, she did not understand where she was. Her body felt heavy and her head ached slightly. She tried to sit up, but a wave of weakness forced her back down. A soft sound nearby made her freeze. She turned her head slowly and saw a man sitting in a chair near the wall. He was watching her, but not in a threatening way. His expression was calm, almost careful, as if he did not want to frighten her. "You're awake," he said quietly. His voice was deep but gentle. Ayana's heart began to race. She quickly pulled the thin blanket closer around herself and tried to remember what had happened. The trail, the heat, the darkness, then nothing. "You fainted near the cattle path," the man continued. "I brought you here." She studied him closely. He wore simple ranch clothes, dust still clinging to his boots. His hat rested on a small table beside him. He did not move toward her. He simply waited. "Where is here?" she asked softly. Her voice felt dry. "My cabin," he replied. "Not far from the ranch I work on." She glanced around the room. It was small but clean. A wooden table stood near the window. A stove sat in the corner. There were no decorations on the walls, no signs of family life. The space felt quiet, almost lonely. He stood slowly, keeping his movements steady so she would not feel threatened. He poured water into a tin cup and held it out toward her. "You need this." She hesitated only a second before accepting it. Her hands trembled slightly as she drank. The cool water felt like life returning to her body. "My name is Daniel," he said after a moment. She did not answer right away. Trust did not come easily anymore, but something in his tone told her he was not demanding anything from her. "Yana," she said finally. The name felt strange on her lips after days of silence. Daniel nodded once, as if that was enough. For the rest of that day, she rested. Daniel brought her a simple bowl of warm broth. He placed it on the table near the bed and stepped back, giving her space. "You can stay until you're strong enough to travel," he said. "No one will bother you here." His words were simple. No questions, no pressure. That confused her more than anything. She had grown used to being questioned. "Where are you from? Why are you alone? What are you doing here?" But Daniel did not ask. Over the next 2 days, her strength slowly returned. She noticed the way Daniel moved around the cabin. He woke before sunrise. He stepped outside quietly, often returning with firewood or tools. He spoke little, even to himself. On the third morning, she insisted on standing. "You should rest," he said. "I have rested enough," she replied softly. Her legs were unsteady at first, but she forced herself to walk toward the small window. Outside, she saw open land stretching far into the distance. A few cattle grazed lazily beyond a wooden fence. The sky was wide and blue. "It is peaceful," she said without thinking. "It is," Daniel answered. "Most days." She noticed something in his tone, something unspoken. That afternoon, she watched him repair a broken fence post just outside the cabin. She stepped out slowly, holding the doorframe for support. "You don't have to do that," he said when he saw her. "I want to help," she replied. He studied her for a moment, then handed her a small tool. He showed her how to hold the wood steady while he secured it in place. Their hands almost touched once, but both quickly pulled back, unsure. The work was simple, but it meant something. By evening, she felt tired but proud. For the first time since leaving her home, she had done more than survive. She had contributed. Inside the cabin, as the lamp flickered softly, she asked the question that had been sitting quietly in her mind. "Why did you help me?" Daniel did not answer right away. He stared at the flame for a long moment. "Because you needed help," he said finally. "That's reason enough." She sensed there was more to his story, but she did not push. In the days that followed, Ayana began to take small steps into this new routine. She swept the cabin floor. She washed dishes at the water pump outside. She mended a tear in Daniel's work shirt without being asked. Daniel noticed. "You don't have to earn your stay," he told her one evening. "I know," she replied, "but I need to feel useful." He understood that more than she realized. Word began to spread in the nearby town. Ranch hands passed by occasionally, and one of them had seen Ayana near the cabin. Whispers started quietly. Daniel heard them when he went into town for supplies. "You're keeping company now?" one man joked lightly. Daniel ignored him. Another asked more seriously, "You sure that's wise?" Daniel paid for his supplies and left without answering. Back at the cabin, Ayana sensed the shift in his mood. "Did I cause trouble?" she asked carefully. He shook his head. "People talk, they always do." Her chest tightened. She did not want to bring difficulty into the only safe place she had found. "I can leave when I'm stronger," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. "You nearly died out there," he said. "This isn't about what people think." She lowered her eyes. She was not used to someone defending her. That night, as wind brushed against the cabin walls, she lay awake thinking about the strange path her life had taken. Just days ago, she had been alone on an endless trail, unsure if she would see another sunrise. Now she was under a solid roof, listening to the steady crackle of a small fire. Yet safety felt fragile. She knew the world beyond that cabin was not always kind. She knew how quickly acceptance could turn into rejection. The next morning, she rose before Daniel. She stepped outside and watched the sunrise paint the sky in soft colors. The land was beautiful in its quiet way. She realized something important. This place did not feel like charity. It felt like possibility. Daniel joined her outside a few minutes later. They stood side by side, not speaking, watching the light spread across the fields. "You're stronger already," he said. She nodded. "I had to be." He respected that answer. As the days passed, a quiet understanding formed between them. They did not share deep secrets yet. They did not speak of the past in detail, but they worked together. They shared meals. They learned each other's rhythms. Iana began helping with small ranch tasks, feeding chickens, carrying water, organizing tools in the shed. She listened carefully when Daniel explained how the cattle moved with the seasons, how fences must be checked after storms, how the desert could be both generous and unforgiving. In return, she told him small pieces of her own knowledge, how certain plants could help with fever, how to read the wind before a change in weather, how the stars could guide direction at night. Daniel listened. That surprised her. Most people she had met outside her tribe listened only long enough to respond. But Daniel truly listened. Still, a quiet tension hung in the air. Neither of them spoke about what would happen next. Was this temporary? Was it the beginning of something new? Or simply a short pause before another goodbye? One evening, as they sat across from each other at the small wooden table, Ayana felt the weight of uncertainty pressing against her chest. She did not want to run again, but she did not know if she was allowed to stay. Outside, the wind carried distant sounds from the open land. Inside, two people sat in silence, both wondering what the future would demand of them. And though neither said it aloud, both understood one truth: their lives had already begun to change. Whether the world accepted it or not, the days after Yana's recovery passed with quiet rhythm. She learned to move around the cabin with confidence, fetching water, gathering wood, and even helping with small repairs. Daniel watched her carefully, never rushing her, never treating her as a burden. Yet, even as they found comfort in the routines of daily life, the outside world began to creep in like a shadow. It started with whispers in the town nearby. Daniel noticed them the moment he went to buy supplies. The shopkeeper's eyes lingered too long, and passing ranch hands muttered words just loud enough for him to hear. "Helping her is risky," they said. "You know how people will talk." At first, Daniel ignored them. He had spent years dealing with judgment. His life had been hard, and he had grown used to standing alone. But the whispers kept coming. When he returned to the cabin one evening, he found Ayana sitting by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, the glow of the flames reflecting in her eyes. "I can feel it," she said softly, almost to herself. "They don't want me here." Daniel looked at her and shook his head. "Let them talk. This is our land. This is our work. You're safe here with me." But she could not shake the unease. Memories of being forced to leave her family, of being alone on dusty trails, returned with startling clarity. For weeks she had fought to survive, but now she realized survival was not enough. She wanted more. She wanted a place to belong, a place where she would not always be running, always fearing the next word, the next look of suspicion. One afternoon, a group of men from the town appeared near the edge of the ranch. Iana had been tending the small garden outside the cabin when she saw them. Their horses kicked up dust as they approached. Daniel stepped forward, blocking the path, his stance firm but not aggressive. "You're keeping someone here who doesn't belong," one of the men said sharply. "People are talking, Daniel. This won't end well." Yana felt her chest tighten. She had hoped that working quietly, helping with chores, and keeping to herself would be enough. She realized now that it might not be. She watched the tension rise in Daniel's face, saw the muscles in his jaw tighten, and she knew he wanted to respond, to defend her. But before he could speak, she did something unexpected. She stepped forward. Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried a courage she had not known she possessed. "I am not asking to cause trouble. I only ask for a chance to stay." "Please," she said, her eyes meeting Daniel's for reassurance. Daniel stepped back slightly, surprised by her words. He had not expected her to speak on her own. Her courage gave him a moment to breathe, a moment to realize that she was not just someone to protect. She was a human being who had endured far more than he could imagine. The men stared at her, confused by her directness. None of them had expected this quiet, strong presence. Finally, after a tense moment, they muttered warnings about trouble finding its way to her and rode off, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. Yana closed her eyes, feeling the weight lift slightly, but her relief was tempered by the fear that the world outside might still come knocking again. She turned to Daniel, her voice almost a whisper. "Don't leave me alone." The words surprised both of them. Daniel had been prepared to defend her physically, to argue with the men, but not to hear such an honest, vulnerable plea. There was no anger in her request, no expectation of more than what she could hope for a chance. She did not demand love or safety beyond this moment. She only wanted a chance to stay, to live. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He had lived years of solitude, convincing himself that his pain was easier to bear alone. Yet here was someone who trusted him enough to ask for help, someone who had endured so much and still asked not for pity but for partnership, for presence. That night, they sat together by the fire. Yana's hands were wrapped around a cup of warm tea, and Daniel poured his own quietly. Neither spoke immediately. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, reflective, a space where both could consider what had been said, what had been felt. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You won't be alone," he said simply. "Not here, not with me." Yana nodded, but even as relief washed over her, the memories of past loss whispered in the corners of her mind. Trust was fragile, safety was fragile. The fear of losing another home, another person, still lingered. Over the following days, Ayana found herself testing the boundaries of this new life. She helped with more than the cabin chores. She learned to ride the horses carefully, tending the animals with patience and skill. She learned to move quietly across the ranch, observing the patterns of work and nature. With each task, she felt a little more confident, a little more present. Daniel, for his part, noticed the changes. He began to share small details of his life with her, how he managed the ranch, how he spent winters alone, how the desert taught him lessons he would never forget. He did not share everything at once, but little by little, Ayanna began to understand the rhythm of his life, and he began to trust her with parts of himself he had hidden for years. And yet, the outside world remained. Travelers passed along nearby trails. Occasionally, people from town would come asking for help or supplies. Yana noticed the cautious glances and whispered comments. She learned that even small kindness could stir gossip. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence together, Ayanna paused and looked across the fields. "Do you ever worry what people will think?" she asked. Daniel considered her question carefully. "I've lived long enough to know that people will always talk," he said. "It is not our concern as long as we do what is right." Ayanna nodded. She wanted to believe him, and she wanted to let go of fear. But the memories of the trails she had walked alone, the nights spent in cold and silence, made it difficult. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she found herself standing outside the cabin, watching the horizon. The desert sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold. She breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs. She thought of the trail where Daniel had found her, of the moments when her body had failed her, and of the courage it had taken simply to walk toward the unknown. Daniel joined her quietly, standing at a respectful distance. Neither spoke at first. The only sounds were the soft rustling of the wind and the distant call of a hawk. Finally, Yana turned to him. "I do not want to run anymore," she said, her voice steady now. "I do not want to hide. I only want to live, to be safe, to have a chance at something better." Daniel felt the weight of her words settle on him. He understood that her plea was not just for protection. It was for belonging, for recognition, for the chance to rebuild a life she had not been allowed to have. He placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "You won't have to run," he said. "Not here, not with me. You are not alone." Yana felt tears prick her eyes. Relief and gratitude mingled with lingering fear, creating a complex warmth she had not felt in years. She realized in that moment that safety was not just about shelter or food. It was about trust, connection, and the courage to ask for help. That night, as they ate a simple meal by the fire, a new understanding had formed between them. They did not need grand words or promises. They only needed to be present for each other, to protect, to trust, and to hope. For Ayanna, the plea she had spoken earlier, "Don't leave me alone," was no longer just a fear-driven request. It was a declaration of her desire to step into life again, to claim a place where she belonged. And for Daniel, it was a reminder of the strength it took to care for someone else, and of the quiet, unexpected ways that another person could bring life back into a heart that had known too much loss. Outside, the desert stretched endless and silent. Inside, two people began to understand that life could be rebuilt, piece by piece, with patience, courage, and trust. Even as the world outside whispered and judged, within the walls of the small cabin, something fragile and powerful had taken root. A promise not spoken aloud, yet deeply felt. It was the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected, a journey that would teach them what it meant to survive, to trust, and to truly live. And though storms might come, and though challenges would test them that night, Ayanna knew one thing for certain. She would not face the world alone again. The days on the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm, yet for Ayanna, every day felt like a new lesson. She had moved beyond simply surviving. She wanted to thrive, to contribute, to feel that her life had meaning again. Each morning, she rose with the sun, feeling the warmth on her skin and the cool breeze that came off the open land. The desert was no longer empty to her. It was alive, full of movement, smell, and sound. She could hear the soft clap of the horses, the low murmur of the cattle, and the whispering wind that told stories older than anyone alive. Daniel continued his work on the ranch, guiding the cattle, checking fences, and managing supplies. At first, he had been cautious, wary of relying on someone new, but Ayanna's determination and quick learning impressed him. She was observant, careful, and attentive to the smallest details. She learned to recognize the health of the animals, to notice subtle changes in the weather, and to read the land as he had done for years. The first time Daniel asked her to help him drive the cattle to a water source, she hesitated. The task required coordination, courage, and careful attention. She knew that one wrong move could result in injury. Daniel watched her closely, offering guidance without pressure. "The cattle will follow your energy," he explained, calm, firm, and patient. She nodded, listening intently, and began to mirror his movements. She guided the animals with soft commands, feeling her confidence grow with every step. By the time the sun had climbed high into the sky, she had learned more in one morning than she had in months of wandering the land. Daniel observed quietly, noting her progress with a sense of pride that surprised him. Work on the ranch was not without challenges. Fences needed constant repair, storms could damage water troughs, and the cattle were sometimes stubborn, refusing to follow the trail. Each problem became a small test of patience and skill, but Ayana approached every task with quiet determination. She discovered strength in her hands, endurance in her arms, and resilience in her spirit. Daniel, for his part, began to open up more than he had in years. He spoke of winters past, of storms that had destroyed fences, of the small victories and failures that had shaped his life. He did not share everything at once, only small pieces at first. But Ayana listened carefully, absorbing not only his words but also the lessons in his tone, his expressions, and his actions. In return, Ayana shared her knowledge. She taught Daniel about plants that could soothe a fever or clean a wound, about reading the sky to predict weather changes, and about respecting the land rather than simply using it. Daniel, who had worked the same land for years, found himself learning from her as well. He realized that strength could come in many forms, and that wisdom could be found in unexpected places. Their days were long and filled with work, yet they found moments of quiet connection. They ate together, shared small stories, and sometimes sat outside under the wide desert sky. In the evenings, when the sun dipped behind the distant hills, they would watch the stars emerge one by one. Yana often pointed out constellations she had learned from her people, and Daniel would listen, fascinated by the stories and traditions she shared. Despite the growing bond, the world beyond the ranch remained uncertain. Travelers passed through occasionally, and whispers from town persisted. Some neighbors continued to question Daniel's decision to shelter Yana, while others simply kept their distance. It was a reminder that acceptance was not guaranteed and that the outside world could be harsh and unforgiving. One morning, while tending the garden, Ayana paused and looked across the fields. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the wind moved gently through the tall grass. She felt a sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride in the life she was building. Yet she also felt the weight of uncertainty. She could not ignore the reality that their peaceful days could be disrupted at any moment. Daniel noticed her pause and came to stand beside her. "You're doing well," he said simply. "You've learned quickly and you've earned your place here." Yana smiled faintly but looked down. "I still worry," she admitted. "What if people come again? What if I can't stay?" Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we face it together," he said. "I will not let you face it alone." His words carried a depth that she had not expected. It was not just a promise of protection, but a declaration of partnership. She realized that this small ranch, these routines, and this quiet man had become more than just a place to survive. They had become a home. Over the following weeks, their relationship continued to grow, rooted in trust and shared effort. Yana's confidence expanded beyond the work she did. She began to speak more freely, ask questions, and make decisions. Daniel encouraged her independence, understanding that true safety came not from controlling her, but from supporting her strength. Together, they faced challenges as they arose. One afternoon, a sudden summer storm swept across the land, bringing strong winds and heavy rain. The cattle became restless, and a fence near the northern edge of the property broke under the force. Yana moved quickly, helping Daniel secure the animals and repair the damaged fence. They worked side by side, shouting instructions over the roar of the wind, relying on each other's skills and judgment. When the storm finally passed, they stood soaked and exhausted, but with the ranch intact. "That was intense," Ayana said, laughing despite her fatigue. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You did well, better than I expected." The shared victory strengthened their bond. They realized that their partnership was not just about surviving the day-to-day tasks of the ranch, but about facing life's unpredictability together. As the seasons changed, so did their routine. Winters were colder and required careful attention to water and firewood. Springs brought new life to the land, with fresh grass for the cattle and flowers blooming across the hills. Each change reminded them that life was ongoing and that they were part of something larger than themselves. Yana's presence began to change Daniel's cabin as well. He added small touches that reflected her personality, her plants, a simple cloth she had woven, and small tools arranged in ways she preferred. The cabin became more than a shelter. It became a shared space, a home in the truest sense. The bond between them grew quietly, naturally, without force or expectation. They shared laughter, worked hard, and supported each other through uncertainty. The world beyond the ranch remained unpredictable, but within its boundaries they found stability, respect, and a growing sense of belonging. One evening, as they sat on a small hill overlooking the land, Ayana spoke quietly. "I never thought I would find a place like this," she said, "a place where I am not just surviving but living." Daniel looked at her, seeing the depth of her experience, the strength and resilience that had brought her here. "You've earned it," he said simply. "You've worked hard, learned, and proven yourself. This is your home as much as it is mine." Yana felt a warmth spread through her chest. She realized that her journey had not been just about finding safety, but about reclaiming her life. With Daniel by her side, she could face the future with hope, courage, and determination. Life on the ranch was not perfect. There were challenges, doubts, and moments of fear. But each day they faced them together, learning from each other and growing stronger in the process. Yana understood that true strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from meeting it with resilience, support, and trust. By the end of that season, the ranch had changed in subtle but important ways. The animals were healthier, the fences stronger, and the cabin warmer. But more importantly, both Ayana and Daniel had changed. They had found a rhythm, a connection, and a partnership that neither had anticipated but both had come to rely on. For Ayana, the cabin was no longer just a place of refuge. It was a place of possibility, where she could rebuild her life and regain her sense of purpose. For Daniel, her presence had brought light into a life that had been quiet and solitary for too long. Together, they had learned that life was not just about survival. It was about creating, building, and nurturing something meaningful. And in that quiet desert land, surrounded by cattle, wind, and sky, they were creating a life together, piece by piece, filled with hard work, trust, and shared hope. As the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Ayana and Daniel sat together, knowing that the path ahead would not always be easy, but that they would face it side by side. In the vastness of the desert, amidst the challenges of the land, they had found not only safety, but a sense of belonging and the promise of a new life. The seasons continued to change on the ranch, bringing with them new challenges and new lessons. Spring arrived with fresh grass, gentle rain, and the promise of growth. Ayana and Daniel worked side by side, tending the cattle, repairing fences, and preparing the land for another cycle of life. The small cabin they shared had grown into a home, filled with the quiet presence of two people learning to trust, care for, and rely on each other. Life was not without its struggles. The cattle sometimes wandered too far, storms damaged fences, and supplies from town could be delayed. Yet, each difficulty became a test they faced together. Ayana had grown confident in her abilities, and Daniel had come to value her judgment and insight. They moved through their days as a team, quietly supporting each other, anticipating each other's needs, and celebrating small victories. Yana often reflected on how much had changed since the day Daniel had found her on the trail. At that moment, she had been alone, frightened, and unsure if she would survive another night. Now she had a home, a purpose, and someone who truly saw her as more than just a survivor. She understood that her journey had not been about escaping danger alone, but about finding a place where she could belong and contribute. Daniel noticed these changes in her. He admired her courage, patience, and strength. He had spent years in solitude, convinced that loss and pain were easier to bear alone. Yet Ayana had quietly taught him otherwise. Her presence reminded him of what it meant to care deeply for another human being, to find connection and meaning even after enduring hardship. As the months passed, their partnership deepened. Mornings were filled with work in the fields, tending animals, and maintaining the cabin. Afternoons brought moments of learning, when Daniel shared his knowledge of the land, and Ayana offered insights from her own experience and heritage. Evenings became times of quiet reflection, when they watched the sun dip behind the hills and the stars emerge in the desert sky. One summer day, as they worked repairing a fence near the edge of the property, Iana paused to look across the wide expanse of land. The cattle grazed calmly, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers from distant hills. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for the work she had completed, but for the life she had built alongside Daniel, a life she had chosen piece by piece. Daniel approached her silently. "You've come a long way," he said. "I don't think I've ever met anyone as determined as you." Iana smiled faintly. "I had to," she replied. "I couldn't go back to being lost." He nodded, understanding more than she realized. He knew that her courage had not come without struggle, that each step she had taken toward rebuilding her life had required both physical and emotional strength. And he knew that her presence on the ranch had changed him as much as it had changed the land. As the summer turned to autumn, their connection became more evident to others as well. Neighbors who had once whispered cautiously began to see them as a team, working together to maintain the ranch and care for the animals. The respect that had been absent slowly grew, and the rumors faded. The world beyond the ranch still existed with its challenges and judgments, but within the boundaries of their shared life, they found stability, trust, and understanding. One evening, as the sky turned gold with the setting sun, Iana spoke quietly. "I never imagined I would find a place like this," she said, her voice carrying a mix of awe and gratitude. "A place where I am not just surviving, but truly living." Daniel watched her, taking in the depth of her words. He saw the transformation she had undergone, the way she moved, spoke, and carried herself with quiet confidence. "You've earned this," he said, "not because of anything I've done, but because of who you are." Yana's eyes filled with tears. She had faced so much loss, yet here she had found acceptance, trust, and a chance to rebuild her life. She realized that her plea months earlier, "Don't leave me alone," had been more than a cry for protection. It had been a declaration of her determination to step into a new life, to claim a place where she could belong, and to allow someone else to share the journey with her. As winter approached, they prepared for the colder months together. Fires were tended, water stored, and fences reinforced. The work was hard, but it was shared, and the companionship made the challenges easier to face. Iana learned to ride through snow-dusted fields, to anticipate the needs of the animals in cold weather, and to rely on both her instincts and Daniel's guidance. In the evenings, they often sat together by the fire, sharing stories of the past and hopes for the future. Yana told Daniel about her family, the traditions of her people, and the lessons she had learned from a life of hardship. Daniel shared his own memories of storms survived, cattle lost, and the quiet days spent alone in the vast desert. Through these exchanges, they discovered a profound understanding and respect for one another, a recognition that each had endured challenges that shaped them, and that together they could create a life richer than either could have imagined alone. Over time, the bond between them became undeniable. It was not a sudden realization, but a gradual awareness of reliance, respect, and affection. They shared not only the physical labor of the ranch, but also the emotional work of rebuilding lives scarred by loss. Iana's presence brought warmth to Daniel's heart, while his steadfast support gave her confidence and security. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel finally spoke words he had long held in his heart. "Iana," he began carefully, "I've watched you grow, survive, and thrive. You become part of this place, part of my life. I want you to stay, not just as someone I protect, but as someone I share my life with." Iana felt a rush of emotion. She realized that the man who had once seemed distant and reserved had come to care for her in ways she had not expected. His offer was not about duty or obligation. It was about trust, respect, and love. With a soft smile, she took his hand. "I want to stay," she said, her voice steady but full of feeling. "Not just to survive, but to live with you." The years that followed were filled with steady work, shared joys, and quiet triumphs. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts, and the cabin became a true home, filled with warmth, laughter, and shared purpose. Iana and Daniel built a life together that was not defined by fear or loss, but by resilience, partnership, and hope. Through every season, they faced challenges together: storms, wandering cattle, and occasional judgments from outsiders. Yet with each trial, their bond grew stronger. They had learned that life was not simply about surviving hardships, but about meeting them with courage, cooperation, and unwavering support for one another. Yana often reflected on her journey from a frightened, wandering girl to a strong, confident woman with a home, a purpose, and someone to share it with. She knew that Daniel had changed as much as she had. His heart, once closed by loss and solitude, had opened to trust, compassion, and love. Together, they had created a life neither had anticipated, a life filled with meaning and connection. On quiet evenings, as the stars glittered across the wide desert sky, they would sit side by side, watching the land that had once seemed empty and harsh now feel alive and full of promise. They understood that the world outside could still be uncertain, but inside their shared life, they had built stability, safety, and a home where they could both flourish. Their story, which had begun on a dusty trail with desperation and fear, had transformed into a tale of resilience, partnership, and renewal. Yana and Daniel had discovered that true safety and belonging were not simply about walls or fences. They were about connection, trust, and the willingness to face life together. And in that vast desert, under skies that stretched endlessly above them, two people who had once known loneliness had found not only each other, but also a life rich with possibility, hope, and the quiet joy of belonging.